Hello, I'm Carla Robinson. When the Canadian Armed Forces bought some second-hand submarines from Britain, it thought it was getting a good deal. They were pretty advanced, they hadn't been used very much, and they weren't very old. But they proved to be very costly indeed, for the Navy, for its reputation, and for the family of a Canadian sailor. Her Majesty's Canadian ship Chicoutimi was the fourth and last of the subs to be readied for the trip across the Atlantic Ocean. The others had their share of problems. It would too. 200 kilometers off the coast of Ireland, it had to send out a distress call. There was a fire on board.
The fire was put out by the crew, and the submarine was brought to the surface. Of the 57 crew members on board, 9 were treated for minor smoke inhalation, and all are reported to be fine.
We would soon learn, though, that the situation on that stormy sea was far more dangerous, and Canadian sailors were hurt. The CBC's Heather Hiscox has the story of Chicoutimi's ill-fated voyage.
Fastlane, Scotland. The music was mournful, the skies dreary. But the Canadian Navy got the royal treatment as it took control of HMCS Chicoutimi, some 3 years behind schedule. After its final preparations, Chicoutimi headed out to sea, bound for Halifax. There were no cameras along for its trip, but 3 years ago, a CBC documentary crew was on board HMCS Windsor for its maiden voyage under the Atlantic. It captured the drama of the first few hours, and especially the first dive.
At 1400, settling out on the watch overnight.
2-0.
No new leaks reported throughout the submarine.
Diving now, diving now.
On board Chicoutimi, the moment, the focus, were certainly every bit as intense. Brian Kelly is the cameraman who shot the pictures. He remembers what it was like for the Windsor crew early in the trip, just 200 kilometers offshore, the same point where Chicoutimi would later run into trouble.
It's a scary time. You don't know what's going to go wrong. You don't know exactly how the sub's going to behave, it's just a constant worry.
For Windsor's crew, it was one malfunction after another, a string of potentially dangerous problems, from leaking hydraulic fluid to crippled sonar equipment. They busily fixed those as they tested safety procedures. The most important one for fire. Even the practice drills made a lasting impression on Brian Kelly.
What happens is that everyone has to don these masks, similar to gas masks, immediately. They're terribly claustrophobic after a time. You can't really see properly. You wouldn't be able to see properly because of the smoke and the low light conditions.
Off Ireland's west coast, Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. The drill Brian Kelly witnessed on Windsor became reality on Chicoutimi. Fire broke out in an electrical panel. Fire is the most dangerous thing on board a submarine and potentially catastrophic because it quickly sucks up all breathable air.
And probably within 2 to 3 seconds at the most, the submarine was, the section that we were in was totally black. I know personally where I was standing, I had a small flashlight or torch, and I couldn't see it from about this distance. So it was very, very thick.
The submarine surfaced, and Commander Luc Pelletier sent out a distress call. At home, the first hint of trouble came a few hours later, when defense officials in Halifax announced an incident.
We don't know any details of the fire except that it occurred on an electrical panel on board. And that's all we have at the moment.
Chicoutimi and its crew were stuck, powerless, rudderless, battered about by high winds and a heaving sea. Rescue crews were hampered, some even turned back by the bad conditions.
Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, Commodore Tyrone Pyle.
By the second news conference, the picture had begun to change to something far more serious. From Commodore Pyle, two stunning revelations. The fire on board Chicoutimi was not small, it was major.
Information received overnight clearly indicates that the damage caused by the fire was more extensive than first thought. We still do not know where the fire started, but it did cause significant damage to the commanding officer's cabin and the electrical equipment room.
And it wasn't the only one.
Shortly after this first fire, Chicoutimi also reported a second minor fire in one of her oxygen generators. An oxygen generator is this piece of equipment that's here on the table.
It was basically a shower of sparks and flame, which quickly resulted in a lot of smoke being generated and filled the two-deck area in the middle part of the submarine very, very quickly.
Flame shooting out? How would you describe it?
Well, they were sparks with flames behind them. They basically shot out several feet out into the corridor from the electrical space.
Communication with the Chicoutimi was initially limited to a spotty satellite cell phone link. Wednesday morning, as far as Commodore Pyle was aware, the crew was still okay.
The commanding officer was very positive about the state of the crew last night and actually ordered most of them to go to bed.
Mid-morning, the first rescue ship, the British frigate HMS Montrose, was finally able to reach the sub and a doctor able to board. It was the first indication conditions on board were worse than first reported. Of the 9 sailors who'd suffered smoke inhalation, 3 had to be airlifted off the Chicoutimi right away. It was early evening when the helicopter landed in Ireland. Master Seaman Archibald McMaster and Petty Officer Second Class Denis Lafleur were well enough to walk to a waiting car, but not Lieutenant Chris Saunders. Paramedics performed CPR as he was transported to hospital. But soon after, back in Canada, word began to spread the Prime Minister was about to make a tragic announcement.
The Minister of Defence has been advised by the Chief of Defence Staff of the tragic death of Lieutenant Saunders while he was being transferred from the HMCS Chicoutimi for medical assistance.
One thing that was clear early on was that seawater had gotten into the sub and caused some electrical lines to short to start shooting the sparks and flames that Lieutenant Commander Rankin described. The big question, though, was why did it happen? This story from CBC reporter Gillian Findlay revealed some key answers.
After the disaster, the denials. Whatever caused the Chicoutimi tragedy, in the beginning, the Navy was clear. The sub itself was safe.
All of the boats that have been transferred from the United Kingdom to Canada have gone through an exhaustive process of engineering assessment, repair and overhaul and maintenance.
No submarine commanding officer or any naval warship commanding officer would ever take a submarine or ship to sea if it wasn't 100% absolutely safe to do so in his mind.
At the end of the sea trials, we got a certificate from the British Admiralty saying that it was safe to go to sea. And our own Navy officials would not have allowed it to go to sea without that.
From Ottawa to Halifax to London, the defense establishment spoke as one. A 5-year, multi-million-dollar refit had brought the Chicoutimi to Royal Navy standard. The sub was technically sound. The implication, of course, was that the fire must have been the result of human error. And it wasn't long before, back in Britain, the second-guessing began.
We question why she was running opened up in such rough seas. That is one thing we do question.
Running opened up. What it means is a submarine that is sailing with both of its hatches located in a tower inside the fin, wide open. That's what the Chicoutimi looked like that day, and we know that that is what led to the flood and ultimately the fire. What's never been explained, though, is why the Chicoutimi was running open. In interviews with nearly a dozen Navy insiders, CBC News has learned there was a problem. Just 24 hours into the trip, and after all that refitting, inside the Chicoutimi's tower, an air vent was broken. A nut had fallen off. A problem so rare and yet so basic, no one could believe it.
What can you think? Oh, here we go again. Like another defect or another problem. Well, it's another problem that with which we can sort out ourselves and carry on, right? It's like, oh, another problem.
But this one was an important problem. Until it was fixed, the sub wouldn't dive, and that's why the hatches were open to do the repairs. 2 submariners were working on the vent when the wave hit. And when it did, disaster. With nothing to stop the water, the torrent raced down the tower, flooding the floors below. Everything was soaked, including, crucially, a series of electrical connectors in the captain's cabin. There was a short, sparks the size of golf balls, and eventually flames. What CBC News has also learned is that in the 1990s, the British Navy changed its specifications for insulating those connectors. Instead of 1 layer of waterproof sealant, the Navy would require 3 layers to provide what it called backup protection. Of the 4 subs Canada bought from the Brits, 3 got that protection. But senior officials in the Canadian Navy told us they've discovered the Chicoutimi never did. It was built before the specifications changed, and for all the talk of bringing it up to Royal Navy standards, the Canadians are convinced the Chicoutimi's connectors, the ones where the fire started, were never upgraded.
The Queen was among those who honored Lieutenant Chris Saunders on Remembrance Day. The 2 other sailors who were seriously hurt that frightful day have recovered. Some have questioned why Canada has to have submarines. The answer from the Navy and the government is that they're needed to protect Canada's sovereignty and national interests. A parliamentary committee has been investigating the accident and Canada's submarine program. It's not expected to release its findings until well into 2006. And that's News in Review. I'm Carla Robinson. Thanks for watching. Smoking Mountain.
They kind of looked at it and they kind of go, God, look what's going on over there.
Mount St. Helens rumbles back to life again.
It was kind of scary when we came down here and it's exploding and we didn't know what was going to happen.
On News and Review today, a giant wakes up. Hello, I'm Carla Robinson. Mount St. Helens has been erupting every now and then for a long time. It's one of the youngest volcanoes in the Cascade Mountain Range that runs from Northern California to southern British Columbia. But it first started erupting more than 40,000 years ago. Long before it was given its name by European explorers, native people who lived near it called it the Smoking Mountain. The beautiful snow-covered volcano had been dormant since 1857, when on May 18, 1980, it exploded with the force of hundreds of atomic bombs. Shaken by a powerful earthquake, the north face of the mountain collapsed, triggering a massive avalanche of rocks, trees, mud, and water. As the mountain's face was ripped away, red-hot lava, steam, and ash rushed out with a force that flattened trees more than 20 kilometers away. 57 people were killed, and hundreds of hectares of forest were destroyed. A massive cloud of ash drifted all over Washington state and even into parts of Canada. Mount St. Helens continued to rumble and belch for another few years. The beautiful cone top of the mountain had been blown off, but inside the giant crater, molten rock continued to flow to the surface and a new dome began to form. Then in 1986, just as suddenly as it had awoken, the volcano went back to sleep again. For almost 20 years, it remained dormant as life slowly returned to the devastated landscape around it. But in late September of this year, deep inside the mountains, something began to stir. Scientists began to record hundreds of small earthquakes, and they kept getting bigger.
We're getting mini earthquakes. They're not normal earthquakes. They're caused by some activity within a volcano in this case.
Scientists believed that molten rock was beginning to move towards the surface again and issued a warning to evacuate people from the danger area. A few days later, after a lot of huffing and puffing, the mountain finally let off a mighty blast of hot air steam.
At about 12:03 this afternoon, we had a small explosion that emanated from the south side of the lava dome.
Pressure rising up from a kilometer below blasted through a glacier and sent a plume of steam and ash billowing 10,000 feet into the sky.
It kind of took everybody by surprise. Everybody was just kind of standing around and they kind of looked at it and they kind of go, God, look what's going on over there.
The eruption was over in a matter of minutes, but 3 days later it was showtime again. The CBC's Chris Brown was there.
You couldn't have picked a more beautiful day for an eruption. Slowly, silently, a cloud of steam and ash peaked over the crater's rim and expanded quickly to cover the entire summit. The plume was at least twice the size of Friday's when the volcano rumbled back to life.
It's still a steady buildup. Hard to say what's going to actually trigger the final punch with the magma, but we're steadily increasing and going up in activity.
Inside the crater itself, things are getting hotter, with constant earthquakes and rock falls and steam everywhere. The scientists flew over after the steam burst to get the latest data and now think they have a better picture of what's going on. Roughly 1 kilometer beneath the crater, explosive magma from the Earth's core is moving upwards, heating the crater floor and the volcano's glacier, resulting in these occasional bursts of steam. The scientists now feel the plug of hardened lava that's holding everything down is about to give, leading to some kind of eruption. When it comes, that eruption could be in the form of a large explosion, powerful enough to hurl rocks outside of the crater. The cloud of ash could also be many times larger and blacker than anything seen so far. The volcano tourists haven't been disappointed. No surprise, there's already a t-shirt.
It was kind of scary when we came down here and it's exploding and we didn't know what was going to happen.
Now, the wait for whatever comes next.
We can't rule out that we could move to a more substantial event on very short notice.
You can see the crater really well.
In the meantime, everyone is being kept back at least 10 kilometers. Close enough for a good picture, but, say the experts, still safely out of harm's way.